Hi, y'all. I'm going to wait for some people to come in and notifications to kick off because, as you all know, I haven't been going live. And that's changing, especially being out here in Delphi. How are you guys doing? So I went live, I think, like a couple minutes early and just to get stuff started. Um, Gosh, you guys, it's been so tiring. So, you have to get up super early when you're here because you have to go wait in line or pay someone to have your place in line. Hi, Sarah. How are you? Good to see you here. So, what happened today? There's been a lot of rumors floating around about when the defense is gonna rest, and we were told that it was gonna happen. Hi, Murky. It's so good to see you. Um, Today was you guys aren't going to believe this. You guys are not going to believe what happened today. So I'll just go through all of this stuff with you guys from the beginning. Um, for the for the first time, hi Darksea, hi Linda, um, hi Colder Covered. So today it was interesting. So usually when we line up, the doors open at 8 o'clock and you get to go in and you get to go upstairs and then they let you in the order that you were in into the courtroom. Today they're like, we're doing things different. You guys are going to line up downstairs where you do when we get out for lunch. So if you guys don't know this, it's a very bizarre process. So not only are there no cameras allowed, no audio recordings allowed, but it's almost, if you do it the right way, one person cannot watch this entire trial. What will happen is, hopefully did I cut out? I have no idea if I cut out or not. This is all of a sudden going to be weird. If you do it the right way, when you get out for lunch, when you break for lunch, hi Mud Squad lover, you are not guaranteed a spot back in. And by the time you get out, there's already a line formed afterwards, so that it makes it so you can't even get in. So one person cannot view this entire thing if you're not media or you're not family. Insane. Okay, so if you guys know, we were all allotted. So there's each victim has 10 seats. So there's 2 victims, so that's 20. Then Richard Allen gets 10 seats, right? So that's 30. Media is supposed to get a total of 12. That's not what happened today. And the rest goes to basically the public. Today was pretty much 17 seats to the media and 18 to the public. And let me tell you, in the public, most of those people were media. A lot of those people were media. So it's interesting. So we got inside, we had to wait, and we got in at 8:20, the new instructions about all this happening. When we finally got into the courtroom, the sheriffs said, listen, there's been a lot of complaints that there's been like whispering and talking. So as soon as court starts, if anyone talks or even whispers, we're going to tap you on the shoulder and we're going to ask you to leave, and you're not going to be allowed back in. So just don't do it. So everyone was just like, okay, no one's going to say anything. We're all on our, have our P's and Q's. So at 8:42, okay, so court usually starts at 9 a.m. 8:42, Richard Allen is brought in. And I haven't been able to talk to you guys about this, and I really want to. So a thing about prison, one thing that I've been told about people I've never been to prison, thank God. But a lot of prison inmates, they walk with their hands clasped behind their back, like clasped like this behind their back. And I've been told that people that are institutionalized, they rarely walk around with their hands in their pockets, because in your head, you constantly have to be ready for a fight, and it makes you really vulnerable to put your hands in your pockets. And every day I've been seeing Richard Allen, he's been having his hands clasped behind his back. And I'm like, wow, it's like prison mode. Like, he's wearing nice clothes. He's not in what I saw him in March. He's in regular clothes now. He's a very slight man. He's short, as we know. He's like 5'4", 5'5". So he's wearing a blue and gray striped shirt, a brown belt, and gray slacks. And this is the first time this week where the front row is allotted for his family. And it hasn't been. The front row has always been media. And then his family sits in the second pew, and then we sit behind that. And on the other side, it's kind of the same too. And when the Allen family came in, they were like really confused because for the first time it said like reserved, and it said Allen family all on the front row. And they were like, oh, wow, we get to sit up front. And Richard Allen looks at Kathy a lot, and they have a lot of like, the days that I've been there, like communicate without talking, like smiling at each other. And it's nice to see if you think that here's a man that has all these psychological issues of like dependent disorder. If you're to believe the psychologist that took the stand the other day, Dr. Westcott, and that he gets to see his person, which she said is his wife, and feels better. So at about 9:03, so also if you guys don't know, about 5 officers always come in with Richard Allen. And now they don't dress as officers. They do the right thing and they wear a suit and tie. So intimidating to the jury, and it's for like keeping everything so it's not a biased place, so that's why he's not wearing orange and not like shackled, so he can look like a defendant instead of like a guilty man, right? Presumption of innocence. And today it seems to me that Richard Allen seems incredibly stressed more than ever, and there's a lot of tension in that courtroom. And it's not just because of the admonishments that were given to us. There's a lot of extra police officers. There's 10 police officers just behind us. And it looks like they're from a few agencies, and they weren't there to testify. So it didn't happen. I didn't get in for the second half, but for the first, it didn't happen. So at 9:03, Gull takes a seat, and the jury is brought in. And the jury's brought in, I would say, about 9:05. Literally, the jury sits down, and the defense says, we rest. That's it. Just we rest. And so we thought that Kathy Allen was going to take the stand today. She did not. Nobody from the defense took the stand. So in Indiana, what happens after the defense rests? So the state is gone. Now the defense is has rested. The state gets to do a rebuttal. And so what's happening right now is we're going through Nick McLeland asked for a sidebar. And while we're waiting in there at a sidebar, I'm noticing what the jury is doing. And I'm trying to read the body language. And it's juror number one, who's a female. She's like all smiles. And maybe it's because like she's like, oh, I get to go home and it's over. So she's all like happy. And she's talking to juror number 2. And then juror number 7 behind her. But she's like totally like just like beaming, smiling. And I noticed that juror number 5 is constantly looking at the Patty family. So I'm wondering, like, because you know how they say there's like sympathy. It's the only thing you do is observe them. So it's interesting. And juror number 6, who I love, he's the most animated. He always is just like, you can kind of tell what he's thinking at all times. Like when the prison videos are playing and we don't get to see him, we don't get to hear him. You just see him over there like this, or like he's very animated. You want me to read? I would love for you to read the Daisy Zick murder, please. I haven't heard of that. Send it to me. Put it in my comments, and then I'll like, it'll remind me and I'll do it. And Baldwin comes back from his sidebar. So you guys, also Andy Baldwin, this whole time sitting next to Richard Allen, he always like has his arm around his chair. Well, not like, he does it quite often, and he like comforts him. And Andy Baldwin's a really decent human being, in my opinion. So he comes back from sidebar, and everyone, all the other lawyers on both sides are still at sidebar, but he comes back with the biggest grin and like looks at Richard Allen. And it might be because he's trying to put his mind at ease, but I just thought it was a nice gesture. Sometimes you need that in a sea of like, if you're up for your life and you have your defense counsel, sometimes just feeling like you have the support of just even one person can help so much. So I really appreciate that, man. I appreciate the defense, but I really, really appreciate Baldwin. So what ends up happening is at 9:14, so sidebar ends about 9:12. At 9:14, Gull says, listen, we're trying to get all these witnesses here today, or a few, she says a few witnesses here today, and it's going to take some time. So, and she's talking to the jury. So instead of having you guys sit here, we're just going to take a recess, and then we'll call you back as soon as we get those witnesses in. So she excuses the jury. And then we are told when the jury's outside the presence of the jury, and Luttrell then asked, Luttrell's a prosecutor, he asked for a matter at sidebar. And so they take another sidebar, they come back, and what we're told is that the state is going to call a few rebuttal witnesses, and they have to have time for the rebuttal witnesses to get there. So we're taking a break. Okay, awesome. And I'm like, how many witnesses are they going to have? I wonder if they're all going to show up today. So it ends up that we had 3. We had the state put on 3 rebuttal witnesses. So that is a few. And while they're doing this and waiting for the rebuttal witnesses, okay, before they do that, Gull says, I haven't received any instructions from either side. And what that means is jury instructions. She hasn't been told by the defense or by the state what they want their instructions to be to the jury, like any special instructions. And Baldwin brings up a couple, and one of them is if the defendant doesn't take the stand. So since Richard Allen did not take the stand, he wants certain instructions, but he doesn't know which one he wants to go with. And he says he needs a little bit of time to think about that. And there's another instruction that the defense wants, and Rosie says it's about, like, you know, something to do with that the judge is the ultimate, like, the knower of facts, and like her word is, you know, it's probably just very basic language. And Rosie says that he will email that later to her today. And she said, Gull said, that's fine. And the defense is allowed to leave and go talk amongst themselves somewhere else to like do some kind of strategy or whatever while we wait for the witnesses. And we're in the courtroom, and it, like, time's just going. And it's really interesting because in those times when you're not writing at 1,000,000 miles an hour and you can't hear what's going on because it's so difficult to hear in that courtroom and see like every angle, but you have a little bit of time when there's nobody on the stand. You can take a look around you and take in what's going on. And my heart just breaks for the victim's family, and especially for Libby's mom, Carrie, and her 2 young daughters that are there. That her youngest daughter with the dark hair, she looked really like sad, not upset, but like it was almost like just solemn, like not like crying sad. It's just like this like atmosphere, and you can understand that. But, and don't come for me for this, because I'm just saying what the truth is not my opinion, okay? Kelsey was in the room sitting next to Becky Patty, and she was just grinning. And it was a dichotomy of what Kelsey was doing compared to the row behind her that was Carrie and her 2 daughters, which I'm presuming are, you know, Kelsey's sisters as well. And they're not jovial. And I mean, there's times, I mean, I guess someone can say a joke and I'm in a courtroom and I'm going to be smiling. So, I mean, who am I to judge, right? But it was just the energy of being that close to something and that being your family member, and you having that like a 180-degree difference than somebody behind you. I don't know. It just, now that's my opinion. It felt bizarre, but her laughing or smiling big is not my opinion. That happened. At 9:23, Baldwin and Matt Hoffman's one of their investigators, come back into court. And this whole time, Richard Allen has been sitting by himself. I mean, without the defense, he has his officers around him, but the prosecution's there and everyone from the defense table that are attorneys, and they're gone. So Matt Hoffman comes back and sits with Richard Allen from that point. until we leave shortly after. Baldwin had come in and to grab a laptop, and then he leaves again. And at 9:32, I would say we're waiting for these quote witnesses, and everyone's just kind of getting tired and bored. I think because everyone gets up so early. So at 9:51, I say the defense walk in with the exception of OJ, and Gull says we're back on the record, and then OJ ends up walking back in later. And so Gull says, I haven't gotten any instructions from either side, okay? And which she had said earlier, but she's saying it again. And she's looking for pattern and instruction. And again, Baldwin saying the thing about the defendant not taking, kind of what I said earlier, like explaining that. And what should I instruct the jury? And they're kind of, explaining kind of a statement that they want, but they'll email it and it'll be out probably tomorrow. Nick McLeland says, he wants like the credibility of a witness and how that's addressed. This is all just normal things that I'm pretty sure happens in, the boring part of lawyering, I guess, right? Of trial lawyering. So she gives the order that each side gets 2 to 2.5 hours for closing arguments. Okay, so this is going to happen tomorrow. So each side gets 2.5 hours, and they ask each side if that's going to be sufficient. And each side says, absolutely, that's enough time to do their closing. And Gull is actually kind of being like, she's like kind of showing a personality that isn't. And she goes, I might start tapping on the box because you guys are getting close to your time. And, I don't want to have to call anybody out on time, but I might start tapping and, letting you guys all know that we need to go now. And I'll be like gently, and she uses the word gently, I'll be gently reminding you of your time. And they ask if in between each side doing their closing, if they get to have a break. And she says, absolutely, we can take a break. So in between each of them going, it's stipulated that we can get a break. And so this goes all the way till 10:25. And it's okay. Each side until state tells us, oh, okay. So then all of a sudden she tells everybody, we're going to take a short break until the state can tell us where they're at. So that was about 30 minutes. We were told it was going to be about 30 minutes. So we're back on the record at 10:25. Still, jury's not in. Okay. And right before, so I went outside to grab a coffee because I didn't have coffee. And Nancy's so sweet. She went to get me a coffee. And God bless Anna Williams, who is one of the victims' mothers. She's Abigail's mom. So we're standing outside the courtroom, and Nancy had just got me my coffee, and Anna comes up and she goes, I just got a text. They're ready to start now. And thank God for her because as soon as she said that, we just like dropped everything, ran inside. And literally as soon as we got, because it's up on the 3rd floor, as soon as we got upstairs, the door shut like right behind us. And if we didn't get in that second, we would not have been in at all for this. We would have missed it. So thank you, Anna Williams. Great looking out. We're told this is where we find out the closing arguments are going to be tomorrow, and that there's 3 witnesses. At 10:30, Richard Allen has walked in through the same door that we've come in through because he's been with his attorneys. He's never come in through that door before. And he always comes in, through the back because he's escorted in. This time the officers went with him, and I'm assuming he was with his attorneys. Ajay says it's going to be about another 30 minutes. And she says this to the family, and she says it kind of like loud enough so we could hear. And I was sitting next to Hidden True Crime, and she was like, thanks for saying that loud enough for us. And like, she's like, you got it. OJ is a really nice, like, lots of expression, really good attorney, lover. She goes to the back and she goes, well, the state was going to call someone. Then decided they weren't going to call someone. Now we're just waiting. And she's just explaining why it's going to be another 30 minutes to one of the officers in the back. So in this 30 minutes, I look and Mike Patty's in the back with all the officers. So the officers are sitting down and Mike Patty is just sitting there like just shooting the beans, because I guess I don't cuss on here, with the officers. And Becky Patty is talking to Susan Hendricks, who's like media, but she's sitting in one of the, public seats, the 18 that we got. And when the court is starting, every seat was filled up. So when I say we almost didn't make it in, let me explain. 6 of those seats today, people didn't make it in. And 4 of them were official reporters who didn't make it in before the doors closed, and 2 were like public. And when I say public, they took a public seat, but both of those 2 people were, well, okay. Anya from Murder Sheets was one of those people. And I guess she got stripped of her credentials of being a reporter. So I guess she's just a public person like I am. But the other person was like someone that works for Dateline, but was in under a public, So basically 6 people didn't make it in. 5 of them, 5.5 of them are, well, I don't call Anya a journalist because she doesn't vet using 2 different sources. And I have a offshoot of a degree of journalism. I have a public relations degree, which you have to take journalism majors to get. And I've written for publications, and you cannot be a journalist and not vet your information and use 2 uncorroborated, like 2 people who don't know each other that say the same thing. That's how you vet your things. You can't just go and like have a microphone, pretend you're a journalist, and everyone believes you're a journalist, but not vet your information and just put BS out there, which in my opinion, she does. Especially the stuff that she has said about the due process gang, and all that stuff will come out at some point. Okay. So this is what I need you guys to understand. This is what is, okay. I want to take you guys to this place because, so the state has a different reason for putting on their case, right? And the defense is going to be doing something completely different than the state. So these are state witnesses. These are rebuttal witnesses. So the first rebuttal witness, you guys, the very first one, Diener calls Breanne Wilbur. So Breanne Wilbur has taken the stand before. She's one of the girls that was on the bridge on the 13th, on February 13th, and she has already been on the stand in this trial, October 22nd. So what is that, like 2, maybe 3 weeks ago? She was on the stand, maybe 3 weeks ago. The state had already called her. She was a state witness. So they call her in as a rebuttal witness. I'll take you guys back to what she said on the 22nd, because I think this is really, really interesting. Okay. So 11 o'clock, the jury's brought in, and Diener calls in Bree Wilbur as her first rebuttal witness. And she says, "You testified previously." And Bree says, "Yes." And she said, "You gave us some Snapchat photos. You gave us a Snapchat of the bench near High Bridge and a Snapchat photo of arriving at Freedom Bridge." And she goes, "Yes." And she said, would you say that when you first arrive, walking from town, because remember they testified that they walked to the bridge that day, those girls did. Bree Wilbur and the 2 Voorhees girls walked, right? Oh, and Anna Spath, they walked. So there's 4, it changes from 4 to 3, depending on what time you're listening to, but they walked there supposedly, okay? So Diener says, would you say that Freedom Bridge is a first thing that you hit when you're walking in from town? And Bree says, yes. So Diener says, I'm turning in, this is State Exhibit 318. So this is a new exhibit that's being given it. And she goes, it's 2 pages. And we can't see it because it's never going to be shown to us. So it's like, 2 pages that are stapled together. And she goes, these are photos of the Freedom Bridge from the day from February 13th, 2017. And can you confirm that? And she's like, yes. That's what these are. And Baldwin says, I just want to do, so basically they kind of do this voir dire, but they call it gathering info. So Baldwin says, I just want to like gather some info. And so Baldwin says, when did you give that to the state? And she goes, when did I give it to Stacy, or like the beginning? And Stacy is Diener's first name. So when did I give this to, you know, Attorney Diener, or like the beginning? And she goes, I don't remember. And he goes, well, is it like, and she goes, well, is it before we talked? I don't remember. And he just goes, okay, no objection to 318. And Diener says, okay, so this is a photo at, if you guys are doing timelines, so this is something in evidence, it's a definite that they're saying, okay? She says, these are your Snapchat photos with timestamps on them. Okay. And she says, this is from 12:25 p.m. on 3/13/2017. And this is when you arrived at the area. And it's Freedom Bridge. I want to take you guys back, and I want you guys to compare what she said October 22nd of this year and the exhibit number that was turned in. So the exhibit that was done when Bree Wilbur was on the stand in October 22nd was exhibit number 211, okay? And 211 were also these Snapchat photos, but they were two separate Snapchat photos, weren't the same ones. They were the 2:43 p.m. of the High Bridge and the 1:26 p.m. of the benches that were the Snapchat photos that Bree Wilbur took on her phone, and there's timestamps of, okay? So that was already done when the state put on their case. Think about this. Think about this, you guys. This is the state's rebuttal witness. What is the state going for here? What are they going, what is the reasoning for putting this person back on as a rebuttal witness, right? So we're back to today, you know, fast forward about 3 weeks. And now it's exhibit 318. And now it's the same photos, one that wasn't admitted, wasn't put in, not admitted, but wasn't tried to be put in. Now they're going to put it in. And so I don't know, since it's 2 pages stapled, if it's 2 pictures or 1 picture, because we don't get to see it. And so Diener says, this is from 12:25 when you guys arrive. Okay. And that was a question she asked earlier, was Freedom Bridge the first thing you hit when you walk in from town? And she said, yes. So it's Freedom Bridge when you guys arrive, 12:25. Okay. And Diener says, this picture's in sequence with your other photos, correct? So that means like you're keeping a timeline. Okay. And so listen, she says, did you see any young girls your age out there on the bridge? And she says, I did not. Now, if anyone knows anything about language, and I know I'm going to be told I'm reading too much into this, but I didn't, and I did not. When you're testifying, when you're saying certain things, if it's a cluster, it becomes, it's just a little bit of a red flag. I just note it. That's just how my brain works. So she says, I did not. Did you see any young girls your age? I did not. Did you see any girls younger than you? I did not. Did you see anyone who looked like the bridge guy picture? No. Do you guys understand that? No. Do you guys know what she said on a same witness, same case? Do you know what she said on the 22nd, you guys? I'm going to tell you guys what she said. I'm going to read you her testimony from the 22nd of October. Same case. She posted some photos on Snapchat. Exhibit 211. This is back October 22nd. Okay. Copies of her Snapchat photos. The first one that she provided was a photo of the High Bridge that was taken at 12:43 p.m. Then the photo that they had described being taken at the benches on the way back, taken at 1:26 p.m. She said the man that they passed caught her attention because it was a warmer day, but he was dressed in many layers with what she described as a deer jacket. She said he was walking with a purpose. Rayleigh, Voorhees, one of the girls with her, had been saying hi to everybody that they passed on the trail because it's a small community like that. And people are friendly and they say hi to each other. This guy, however, did not say hi back, and they got creepy, weird vibes from him. Literally, the 22nd of October, she's saying she sees a guy out there that creeps her out. Today on the stand, as a rebuttal witness, she says she didn't see a guy out there. They don't specify time. Okay. They don't say, but the whole time she's out there, she does not see a guy that's like a bridge guy or anything like that. Okay. It's interesting in my brain. Okay. So the defense now gets to cross her and they say, you have a really good memory from 7 years ago, don't you? And she's like, well, I don't know. I mean, like, nothing really stood out to me that day. I mean, like, if something sticks out, then I'll remember it. And Baldwin says, he's doing the cross, and he says, is it normal for you to like go out there on the high bridge and like walk around and look at people? And she's like, yeah. So Diener takes over and she goes, so on February 13th, 2017, the same day that you were out there snapping those pictures, you became aware on that very day that Abby and Libby were missing. Isn't that correct? And she says, yes. And she goes, so that's why it sticks in your memory. It's why it's a big deal in your memory. She's like, yeah. Okay. Baldwin goes again. And he says, what time did you get to the bench? So we have a timestamp that she got to the bench, right? That's why she's up there, is to do this like timeline, right? And the picture is 1:26 p.m. Okay. So Baldwin says, what time did you get to the bench? And she goes, I don't remember. And Baldwin says, because they're talking about, the 12:25 time. Okay. So he wants to make sure that the jury knows that they weren't just out there at 12:25. That's when they arrived. So this is how he does it. So he says, what time did you get to the benches? And she goes, I don't remember. And he goes, well, it was a little bit later than that, wasn't it? Meaning like later than 12. And she goes, I don't know. He goes, well, like it was more like around 2, wasn't it? And she goes, yes. Objection, says Diener. He's inserting the time. He can't do that. And Baldwin said, well, what I'm saying is I'm talking about what's on the timeline anyways. It's kind of been talked about, right? We already know this. So what's the big deal? Anyway, that's how it ends. And the jury's asked if they have any questions for Breanne Wilbur, and no questions whatsoever. Okay. So I want you guys to listen back to her October 22nd testimony and then her testimony today. And it's totally in contrast to what they're saying up there. Hi, Nancy. Good to see you, honey. Good to see you. Okay. So we have 2 more witnesses, you guys, for the rebuttal. Number 2 is Brian Harshman. Brian Harshman also has taken the stand in this case. Okay. So he's a rebuttal witness, and Nick McLeland brings him up and he says, what's your rank? And he says, I'm an ISP master trooper / detective. So he does both. And Nick McLeland says, you listened to phone calls and you were viewing interviews while Richard Allen was incarcerated, right? You listened to his phone calls and you were reviewing his interviews while he was incarcerated. And he goes, yes. And he goes, can you explain like how he's been housed since he's been incarcerated? Hi, Julie. Love you. Julie and Nancy are here with me enduring all this, you guys. So they were there in the courtroom today. And Brian says, well, he was in a 1-man cell in Westville. He was in a 1-man cell in Wabash, and he was in a 1-man cell in Cass County, a 1-person cell in Cass County. Objection, says Rosie. And he goes, this is beyond the scope. Why are we talking about Cass? Why are we talking about Cass County? And Nick McLeland says, well, we're saying that he was in the same type of condition the whole time he was incarcerated, like the same type of cell. The entire time he was incarcerated, there's been no difference. They lets that in. So overruled the objection. And so they're asking Harshman as the rebuttal witness, and they're asking him, so can you tell us what the difference is between him being at like Westville and then him being in Cass? Basically, they're saying like, are the conditions any better at Cass? And Harshman's basically like, no, they're not better in Cass, because like back in Westville, he had neighbors he could talk to. Yeah, like the neighbors that were calling him baby killer and all that, but he had neighbors that he could talk to. He has no neighbors in Cass. And, you know, there's no rec time in Cass. And if he was good, he had rec time in Westville, which I really would like to know how long they had rec time. You know what I mean? Like, how long Richard Allen, had rec time when he was in Westville. And I know people are going to say, well, he acted out and that's why, and he like tried to commit suicide and that's why he didn't get it. And you guys need to know who number third witness is. So we'll get to that. So, he used to go out in Westville. So Rosie objects and he goes, this is outside the scope. And he's been saying that, right? Like, why are we talking about Cass? Like, nobody's been talking about Cass this entire time. Why, like on rebuttal, why are we talking about this? He goes, this is rebuttal. If you wanted to ask this, Nick, you could have asked this last week. Why are you waiting for rebuttal to ask this? This doesn't meet with any of the criteria of a rebuttal witness. We're not supposed to be talking about Cass. It was overruled. So they got to keep talking about it. So Nick says, were there any other issues that Richard Allen has had at Cass, right? And he goes, yes. He goes, what are those issues? He goes, well, there's been threats to staff. Objection. They're just like, Rosie's like, objection, sidebar. Like, what are you doing? Like, threats to staff? Like, this is a rebuttal witness. Like, they're like, he's been making threats to staff. So they take it up to sidebar. I mean, so I wrote, while there's like, Rosie has, you know, he says these questions have nothing to do with any line of questioning that came up before. Nick McLeland could have asked all these prior. And guess what? When they get back from sidebar, sustained. So now it's sustained. So we got to get that in. And then threats to staff, that's already going to be in the jury's mind. We don't even get to address it. They have to, like, they're told, they're instructed, they're not allowed to take that in. But we're human, you guys. That's how it works. It's part of the game, you know? And it got in. Like, the jury can't take it into consideration. But you know how it works. It's a game of chess up there. Like, it really is. Again, so this is it. So they go, are there any questions from the jury? Jury, in my opinion, is done. Like, they're just like, you guys just rested. We don't want to do this any longer. We're done. I might be putting 10 on 2 there, but I mean, they had no questions. Okay. Now, this is really interesting, you guys, and all credit to Andrea Burkhart, because let me tell you guys something. What she does in there is insane, because it is so difficult to hear. It is so difficult to keep up. And yeah, it helps if you're a lawyer because you know some of the jargon, but nobody can do what Andrea does. Like, what she retains in there is extraordinary. And her hearing is impeccable. So her husband, Mr. Burkhart, don't whisper stuff because you're going to get caught, and don't do it because she has really good hearing. So I wouldn't, and she's a really great human being. She's a very compassionate, great human being as well. But yeah, all hats off to her. So, and this is why, and you guys will know about this probably from her as well. So our third witness is Dr. John Martin. Okay. I want to put a picture in your head. So he's a psychiatrist at Westville. He's Richard Allen's psychiatrist. Okay. And he walks up. He's a very slight man. His background, I think he's Indian. He has heavy accent, so it's also difficult to decipher things that he's saying, but it's also really hard to hear him because he wasn't very loud. When he walks up and they ask him questions, when Gull's swearing him in, she's like, raise your hand. And literally, you guys are going to be able to see. Look. So literally his hand does not go above this. This is how he raises, his hand to swear. And you could tell by looking at him also, he was kind of like, maybe he was tired today. I don't know. But I don't know. He's a psychiatrist, okay? At Correction Institute. What else can I say to you guys, okay? Like, dude deals with like crazy. Okay, so I don't know what to say. Okay, he can't put his hand above his heart level. So Nick McLeland says, are you familiar with Richard Allen? And he says, he was my patient at Westville starting in November of 2022 to November of 2023. And they said, what services are you? Nick says, what services are you providing? And he says, I'm a psychiatrist. And he goes through like his CV, like when he graduated St. John's in 1969. He finished his medical degree in 1976. He had a 1-year membership. He went to Florida at like Jackson Memorial Hospital. He's licensed to practice in Indiana, Florida, and Illinois. Okay. So, all right. And they ask him, are you in good standing in all 3 states? And he says he is. They ask him when he started working in Indiana Corrections. And he said sometime in 2020. And he starts going on about like, I've been doing this since 1983. I've been working in corrections since 1983. And then when I say that, I mean mostly jails and prisons. And he says, are you saying that you're treating psychological problems when you're saying you work in corrections? And he says, yes. And he said, I started working in July of 2020. We're going into that in Indiana State Prison. And I was working 40-hour weeks. And then in February of 2022, I was a psychiatrist at Westville because that person retired. And I was working part-time at first. And then November of 2022, he's very detailed about all this, is when I met Mr. Allen, is what he says. Okay. And they said, do you have a place to go at Westville where you go to meet Richard Allen? And he said, I had an office. Okay. And he goes, he was transferred to us at Westville because of a safety rule. And Nick says, you didn't have an office at Westville? And I'm sorry, it's actually Diener that's asking. Diener says this and says, and it's funny what Diener's going to be doing here. So Diener says, you said that you didn't have an office in Westville? And he goes, yes, ma'am, I did. And goes off the wall, like talking about things. And everyone's just like trying to like jot down everything he's saying in case it's important. Then like realizing like maybe it's not important. And he's saying, I had patients who were in general population. So the reason I write this and all of the stuff he was saying is because juror number 12 writes this down. He thinks that's important. And he does take notes sometimes, so he's good. And and Diener says, did you have a written document that you would enter into a system? Like when you would see a patient, and he says, yes. And he goes, do you have a secure login? He says, yes. And she goes, well, that means that someone can't go in pretending to be you. And she's like, yeah, no. He's like, no, it's me. It has to be me. No one else can log in. No one can get your records. And he says, no. And Diener says, were you aware that he was prescribed medication and what that was? And Dr. Martin says, when he came from holding, he was prescribed Prozac and antidepressant meds. He doesn't name the antidepressant meds. He names Prozac, but he says Prozac and antidepressant meds. And they said, Diener said, do you have a record of when he was given certain meds, like a log? And the doctor says, well, there's my notes. And there's this thing called MAR, and it's administration medical record, MAR. And they sign off with initials if like the patient takes the medication or they don't. and someone signs off with their initials. But the nurses usually inform us if he refused to take his medication before I would get there. And before we would see the patient, the nurses would inform us. So basically, we're not relying on this log. And I say number 8, starting to take notes, which is not like number 8 doesn't normally take notes like that. But number 12 is looking at Richard Allen while this is going on. And so Diener says, I'd like to show you exhibit 319. So this is a new exhibit. And these are notes that you wrote. So can you tell us what, this is? And the doctor is sitting there looking through. I don't think anyone, and I mean, it's meticulous, right? So he's doing the right thing, but I don't think anyone has taken this amount of time. He literally looks at each page. It takes him 4 minutes. And you guys can think 4 minutes, blah, blah, whatever. 4 minutes of sitting in silence with everyone just waiting on like what you're going to say, like with bated breath, is a long time. The jury's waiting. We're all waiting. Diener is standing up there waiting. The defense is waiting. And he's just like 4 minutes, just flipping through the pages, like taking his time, reading everything. But he's being meticulous, right? So after 4 minutes, he looks up and she says, what are those? And he goes, these are the notes that I took. And Diener says, do they accurately depict what meds he was on before coming to WCU? And he says, yes. And then before that, they admit that exhibit, she takes out another exhibit, and it's exhibit 320. And she says, here's an exhibit of the medications that he's on. And they ask him to look at it. This took 45 seconds. Now, 45 seconds, you guys, is a little bit, it is longer than most people on a witness stand take to look at something and like confirm what that exhibit is. But compared to the 4 minutes, it was like nothing. It was like a piece of cake. Because I was like, I'm like, oh my God, we're going to go for another 4 minutes right now. But it was 45 seconds. And so she says, I'm going to show you exhibit 320. And does 320 show his medication? And Rosie says, I want to ask some questions. It's again like void year, but it's information gathering. And he says, so these are medication records, right? He goes, look, there's a lot of different initials on this, a whole lot of initials on this. These aren't all your initials. And he goes, well, no, yeah, there's a lot. And he goes, this isn't just you, is it? And no, just answer yes or no. Because he keeps trying to explain, this isn't just you. No. And so Rosie says, I object to 320 on the hearsay. This isn't even him. These aren't his initials. Gull overrules it. So exhibit 319 gets in with no objection. And exhibit 320 gets in over an objection. So even though there's an objection, they still get exhibit 320 in. So the first one are notes. 319 are the notes that the psychiatrist took, and 320 exhibit are the medications and like the list of when he took them, the dates he took them. So Diener says, we would like for the doctor to be able to hold this in front of him, exhibit 320 and 319, while he talks to us, for the testimony about like the medication and the notes. And they're like, okay, fine, whatever. So Diener says, you said that Richard Allen entered as a safekeeper. And he goes, yes. And he said, what's the difference between like safekeeper and solitary confinement, like a solitary confinement? And the psychiatrist, Dr. Martin, says, my opinion is safekeeping is that he's transferred to us because we could take better care of him. Solitary confinement. You guys ready for this? Are you guys ready for this? Solitary confinement can also be referred to as a one-man cell. So this whole time that the state's been like, this isn't solitary, it's a one-man cell. He's in a one-man cell. He's in a one-man cell. And then all of a sudden, here's their rebuttal witness going, well, that's solitary, like being in a one-man cell. And it's like, well, did you know he was going to say that? Because that just kind of like Blue Harshman's over here rebutting, saying he's in a one-man cell at Wabash, he's in a one-man cell at Westville, and he's in a one-man cell at Cass, and he's getting treated worse at Cass. And this dude's out here going, well, that's solitary. So it's interesting, right? Hi, you guys. Hi, Sweet and Salty. Hi, Megan R. Good to see you guys. I just thought that was interesting. And so he goes on to explain, Dr. Martin goes on to explain that, listen, solitary confinement has a punitive connotation to it. Okay. So he goes, but Mr. Allen hadn't done anything. He hadn't done anything wrong in the prison system. So here we're hearing all this stuff about like, oh, he was so naughty. He did this, he did that, he did this, he did that. No, he did nothing wrong, according to the psychiatrist who treated him. Hi, Feminem. Hi, Casey. Good to see you guys here. Do you guys understand? Like, the psychiatrist is like, so like, we don't want this punitive name like on what he's doing because he didn't do anything wrong in the prison system. As opposed to like, well, he might have done something outside, right? Because that's what he's saying. But in the prison system, so like having him in solitary confinement, there's no reason to call it that. He said a prison system has responsibilities to keep him safe and to keep him alive, which everyone, agrees to, like, maybe that's why he's in solitary, because he's a danger to himself. Okay, but for how many days, right? I guess as long as he's a danger to himself. But all right, I'm just going to not say anything about that. Okay, and Diener asks Dr. Martin, do you have a familiarity with prisoners under solitary confinement? And he says yes. Diener tries to get him back on track when he starts talking about the Florida prison system, because we're not in Florida, we're in Indiana, right? And he does go off on tangents, and Diener tries to reel him in a couple of times. And so he says it's about making his life more comfortable in that vicinity. So what we did is, like, we got him a tablet. And this whole time Richard Allen's just looking at him, and I wish I could see what Richard Allen was like doing, looking at him. Like, I wish I could see his expression, because he's just like, well, we give him this tablet, like, just to make his life, more comfortable living in this vicinity. And he goes, Diener says, were you aware if he was being taken out of his cell? And the doctor starts to say, well, he had to be to go to, and he's trying to say, like, go with Dr. Wall or whatever. And Rosie says, foundation. Okay. Like, I need to ask him some questions here. So here we go. So again, like a void here, but not, so they get to ask these questions. And Rosie says, so you only met with him 18 times in these 13 months, right? And he goes, yes. He goes, so you weren't there when he was doing all these things. And he goes, no, I know what happened. I know what happened. I know what we're talking about. He goes, did you watch him on like a camcorder video? Like, did you watch that? And Diener objects and says, he can't testify because and Rosie's like, he can't testify because he wasn't there. Sorry, he can't testify. He wasn't there. And Diener says, and that was again overruled. So Diener says, what was your initial evaluation of Richard Allen? This question is asked. Literally, they want him to answer. This is like the question Diener wants him to answer. And he could not stay on task for a long time. And okay, so the question is, what was your initial evaluation of Richard Allen? So this is what he's going to say. So he says this. On November 8th, 2022 was the first time I met with Richard Allen. He had a history of depression without being depressed. And he had a history of anxiety without having anxiety, without being anxiety filled. And then I saw him 3 weeks later after our initial meeting. And that was January 24th, 2023. I needed an informed consent form. I needed him to sign an informed consent form. And Diener says, did he sign a consent form for Prozac? And the doctor says yes in October, which leads me to believe, so this is this doctor didn't have anything to do with that consent form. Okay. And so he says, since he was doing okay, and this is the doctor's words, I was allowed to see him once every 3 months. So since he was doing okay on the January 24th, I was allowed to see him once every 3 months. It could have been once every 6 months after that if he continued to do okay. So he goes, it was like April 24th, 2023. That's when I plan to see him next. And Diener goes, but you saw him on the 13th of April. And he goes, yeah, it was an unplanned visit because he got a call. I didn't catch the name of who called him. He said it so low. He got a call and told me I had to go see him, that something was wrong with Richard Allen. And he said that he went to see him. And Rosie objects. And he goes, he's reading from his notes. This is not about informed consent. He's reading from his notes. And so that was sustained. And Gull said, don't read from it. Okay, just stop reading from this. So he has to put it down. He has to go from memory because it was just there to like refresh his memory. And he said, okay, I went there on April 13th. And what happened was he was naked and had feces on his body. And Diener says, did you see him doing this? Did you see him like put feces on himself or whatever? And he's like, well, when I got there, I saw that there was feces on his head and he was naked. And then I'm also thinking, because he said, okay, I'll say it after I say this. He goes, the officers, quote, ran him to the shower to hose him down. And they gave him a new suicide gown. And so my thing was, if he was naked, I guess he wasn't wearing the suicide. He'd taken the suicide gown off, but I thought the suicide gown, this is my thought, was hard to take off. That's the whole purpose of it. Or maybe not. Maybe that one isn't a turtle suit. I'm not entirely sure. But I guess he got a new one. So he was naked, so he got his suicide gown off. Okay. And had rubbed feces on himself. Okay. And so the Dr. Martin says, my conclusion that day was that he's psychotic. Okay. And they said, what did you do? He said, I have to treat psychosis with antipsychotics. And he goes on to explain this. He goes, quote, I'm looking for insight and judgment. Okay. So I'm looking for a fair understanding, like insight means a fair understanding of what's going on. And he said, I felt his insight and judgment was not okay. So I had to have an alternative plan. So like basically I can't get consent from him to sign because he's psychotic. So I can't get consent for these meds from this man. So I have to have an alternate plan. And he goes that he came up with this thing about giving him Halidol. Okay. And he says Halidol comes in many forms. And, there's an injectable, there's a short acting, a fast acting. And he's explaining how this works. And Diener says, since Richard Allen couldn't consent to Halidol, what did you do? And he said, I called another psychologist and said, we have to talk. We have to go to this emergency meeting. And I called Dr. Walla and Stephen Bonner, and we were a team, and we decided what to do from then on. And he says the next day, so the 14th of April, we had a meeting, and my recommendation was this medication. And what would happen if he didn't take it, So we came out with this form of treatment and reform. It's a form page. It's like treatment and reform. Hi, Truth and Transparency. And he said, there's a first page, and then the second page is criteria that was met before you give him the meds. And Diener said, who made the decision? What criteria was met to give him Halidol? And he said, I gave it to him. And he briefly described the medication regimen prescribed. And Rosie objected. And he says, he's non-responsive. Now, you're going to hear this a lot. Because, we're all listening intently. And he's going off on tangents. And Rosie's just like, objection, he's non-responsive. And it's like, okay, sustained. So Gull's agreeing. Yeah, he's pretty non-responsive. He's just going off in the woods. In the weeds. And he started again. And he started saying stuff again. And he's not answering the question again. So Rosie's like, objection. Again, he's non-responsive. And that was sustained. So Diener says, okay. So you're saying you gave him the short-acting Halidol, right? And he goes, yes, I gave him 5 milligrams intermuscular. So intermuscular means like you shoot it in a muscle, right? So you just like, not in a vein, it goes into a muscle, or like your butt. It could be a butt, right? Somewhere where there's like fat or muscle, whatever. And he goes, I gave him 5 milligrams. Now the high dose of the short-acting Halidol, the high dose of that is 100 milligrams. And I only gave him 5, okay? And he said, I did that. The plan was to do that the 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th to have him level out because doing the short active. And he goes, now I can give him now I went back to see him on the 17th. Now I can give him the long acting one because we can see now that he doesn't have an allergic reaction to this. So I gave him 50 milligrams, and 50 milligrams, the way this is going to work is it's once every 4 weeks. So you do one shot every 4 weeks. And he goes, with this long-acting Halidol, the maximum dose is 450 milligrams. So I'm really giving him a really low dose when I give him 50 milligrams, right? And they say, so Diener says, so what do you do at this point? Like now that you've given him this, like, it's now the 17th and, and actually now it's the 18th because you give it to him the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th. On the 18th, you go there. That was the short acting 5 milligram. The 18th, you go there. Now you're giving him the long acting 50 milligrams. So what do you do? And he goes, you need to monitor him and see if it's treating his psychosis. Make sure it's treating it, right? And he goes, I saw him on the 18th and I gave him this larger dose. And Diener says, well, on the 18th, did he still present to you as psychotic? And he said, yes, he did. The doctor said he did. He was psychotic. And he said the next time he went to see him was April 25th. So from the 18th to the 25th, it's like what, like roughly a week. And Diener says, does he still present as psychotic on the 25th? And he goes, yeah, but there's improvement. And he said, what did you see? What did you take as there being improvement, as him having better signs? Diener's asking. And he said, well, he was at the height of his psychosis on the 13th. So that's like when he's rubbing feces and he's naked and like, when he first starts recommending Halidol. And he said, so on the 25th, there was improvement. Diener says, can you look at your notes and tell us where you see the improvement? Because there was improvement. So there was improvement from getting naked and rubbing feces after you give someone some Halidol for a little bit from the 13th to the 25th, right? But like, what's the improvement? There is improvement is what the doctor said. So Diener's like, can you just look at your notes and tell us what the improvement is? And he's looking at his notes. He goes, one of those things was on the 25th. There was no sign of feces smearing. And he recognized me. And when I walked away, he said, doctor. So I turned back around and engaged with him. He wasn't very communicative, but he asked for his wife. He was showing improvement of his speech because before he wasn't speaking properly. His words weren't forming properly. And he goes, he was having hallucinations. And I think he means on the 13th, that he was having hallucinations on the 13th. And so on the 25th, maybe he wasn't. And he said he was eating his meals. He was asking for a shower. And that he showed some signs of sadness. And they go, okay, so when was the next time you visited him? And he said, May 2nd was the next visit. And Diener said, what did you observe on this day? And the doctor said he was laying down on his back. And there was no evidence that I could see of a psychosis. Okay, so he was laying down and there's no more evidence. Now we're on the 2nd of May. So this Halidol treatment seems to be working according to this doctor. So now we move on. The next visit was the 8th of May. And can you tell us what he did, how he looked, how he appeared on the 8th of May? And he said he was coherent. He was eating his meals. And this is something that he said, you guys. And nobody asked about this. No one confirmed this. And this is tripping me out. Okay. So he says, so this is the 8th of May. The last time he upped his medication to 50 milligrams was on the 18th, right? The 18th of April. It's supposed to last a while, a month or so is what he said. This long-acting intermuscular Halidol injection. And he said that on the 8th, he said, I was giving him a slightly higher dose of Halidol. Make that make sense to me. He never said how much more when he decided to do that. No, but the defense didn't ask him. Does he mean I was giving what? Just, I don't know what to make. I don't know why he said that. Okay. But anyways, after he says this, and I was giving him a slightly higher dose of Halidol, the defense objects to relevance again. So what happens at this point is like kind of hilarious, I think. And I think Diener did a good job. I said Diener has to babysit the exhibit. So Diener goes up, takes the exhibit from him, and he's like laughing, like, you know. Maybe some people in the gallery were laughing. I think a lot of us were just like, my God, please, like, because we're just so intensely like writing, like, just get on with it. Say what's relevant. And she took it away. So she's like, I just want you, when I ask you a question, like, just don't read from it. I don't want there to be objections. Like, let's just stick to this. Like, there's all these objections because basically, like, you're going off in the weeds talking about bizarre stuff. So she goes, when's the next time you meet? And he goes, he almost can't remember without looking at that, which I guess I don't blame. It was like, what, a year ago. So whatever. And he goes, May 23rd, 2023 was in, and she asked, what would you observe on that day? And he goes, the next meeting, there was no observation of psychosis. And said, okay, when was the next time that you met with them? And he said, May 30th, 2023. And Diener said, can you look at the note of what you wrote down for May 30th and then give it back to me? So she's babysitting the exhibit now. Okay. And she hands it to him and she goes, okay. And he hands it back and she goes, okay, so what did you observe? And he says, again, I saw no indication of psychosis. And he spoke to his wife. And they said, when's the next time? And he goes, well, the next time it's 3 weeks later. So now that was May 30th. Now we're on June 20th, 2023. And Diener says, how is Richard Allen's mental health? And Dr. Martin says, there's no evidence of psychosis. So I stopped medication on this day, meaning no more 50 milligrams, same dose of Halidol, but said, and then there's my notes, but he said he increased it. So I have no idea what the milligrams are at this point. And he said there's no more hallucinations and he's free, his words, free of psychosis. And she says, is that something you would have told Richard Allen? Like that you stopped giving him his meds? Did you tell him that? And he thought about it for a while and he's like, I'm not sure. So he doesn't know if he told him that, we stopped your meds. He said, quote, the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that happened on the 20th of June, you guys, is Richard said, quote, I would like to apologize to the families of Abby and Libby. Okay. And Diener says, so what was the purpose of Halidol? And he goes, psychosis is not being in reality. And he starts going into when you have hallucinations and Rosie's just like, objection, relevance. Like this guy cannot stay on, like, what's the purpose of Halidol? We're not talking about hallucinations. Like, okay. So Diener, sustained, and Diener tries to get him back in. So what's the purpose of Halidol? He goes, Halidol will get you back to reality when you're not living in reality. Diener says there was some testimony from another psychiatrist that said that, sometimes if there's illicit drugs, that will make psychosis. Was there abuse of illicit drugs in Richard Allen? And he says no. And then she says another thing that was stated is that there could be a problem with someone's current medication, and that could cause psychosis. Was there a problem with him taking Prozac? And Rosie objects, and it was sustained. And he's like, you can't. Rosie's whole thing was objection was like, you can't say that there's like another person on the stand, like, part of this whole thing. Like, what are you doing? Like, another person said this on the stand. But anyway, so it was sustained, and he was allowed to answer, could Prozac have caused a psychosis? And he said no. And he said, Diener said, would Richard Allen being on Prozac lead to psychosis? And he said no. And she goes, okay, I'm going to pass the witness. And Rosie goes, sidebar, right away. And they get up and do their sidebar. And then afterwards, we're dismissed for lunch. Okay. And what ends up happening is like I was saying in the beginning of this, one person, they're trying to make it so like you can't even watch this whole thing the whole way through. So you show up. By the time you go down, you have to get back in line to go up after lunch. Your place is not saved. Okay. You have to either pay somebody to go sit there like all day for like the second half. You have to pay them to be there all morning till the time you get there. Then someone else has to get back in while you're up there. You leave, and hopefully someone's there holding your spot so you can get in. If there isn't, you're not going to get in. And it's like, there's no person who can continuously take a continued docket of what's going on if you do it the right way. So thank goodness for people that are sitting there in this line and doing it, for the good souls of us out there that are doing it. Thank goodness for people that do it. And Andrea is just freaking a beast in there. Like, she hears everything. I'm telling you, this testimony from tonight was so hard because of his accent and how low he spoke, and also like his train of thought and where he was going, and to hold on to that. It was, give her props tonight when she does this, because it was hard, you guys, like seriously hard. So that's what happened. Then we left, and obviously I didn't get back in. And tomorrow's the closing. Hi, Casey. Hi, you guys. Just want to say hi really quick. It's just, I've been doing this case for so long, you guys, and it's nice to get to this place and finally see some of the evidence that they have. But at the same time, it's kind of, sometimes it raises more questions than answers when you're in there. Do you know what I mean? Hey, SARS. They're just like, oh, it just cures psychosis. And it probably does. He's saying he's giving him the lowest amount, you guys. So he's saying the long acting, he's doing 50 milligrams, and he could be doing 400. The high amount is 450, right? I feel bad for RA's treatment. I feel they gave him psychosis and overwhelmed him with pictures and information, causing him to believe things that weren't true. And if you believe Dr. Westcott's testimony that he has dependent personality disorder, it just makes it sad, because it's like his person isn't there to tell him things are going to be okay. And I guess somebody with that personality disorder really needs that. It's interesting. Hi, Rachel. Thank you. Boozledipa. It will. That's a cool name. You guys, so I have to get in tomorrow. Like, this is what happens. And you follow a trial, you're here giving it your all, but there's only so many seats. And you guys, mainstream media is getting this so freaking wrong. I was told today that Wish TV yesterday put out that. So what had happened is Gull told us, so before what was announced to us in the courtroom by the officers today, yesterday Gull said it like at the end. She said, listen, if any of you guys speak, you're going to get tapped on the shoulder and told to leave. No speaking in this courtroom. And she did this outside the presence of the jury. Okay, you guys, the jury wasn't even in there. So you're going to get tapped on the shoulder and asked to leave. I was told that Wish TV said, she yelled at the jury members and said, if you guys talk, you're going to be tapped on your shoulder and asked to leave. No. She's really nice to the jurors. I mean, as she should be, right? But that's not true, not even a little bit. So mainstream media, I keep finding things that you guys get wrong when we're inside there listening. And there's this one thing I put out where they said that Max Baker listened to 700 hours of Richard Allen's videos. And 700 hours, okay. And then the other TV, the other outlet said it was 700 videos. There's a big difference between 700 videos and 700 hours. And if you're reporting and you're a journalist, like I also said in the beginning, mentioning somebody who claims they're a journalist but does no vetting whatsoever and puts just crap out there that's sensationalized and is incredibly biased, say you're biased. Don't call yourself a journalist if you're biased about something. At least admit it. I have no patience for that whatsoever. But oh, thank you, Emerald. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here listening. You guys, don't believe things you're reading out there in mainstream media, because half of it is just wild. Like they are spazzing out. Literally, they are spazzing out. It's hard to hear in there, and they're misreporting. I don't know if they get paid for every line. Like, okay, if I get this out to the news before somebody else does, I get $5. Like, I don't know what it is, because what is the spazzing thing? Get your information right, or don't do it at all. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. It just has something like it's a. Thank you, Linda Farley. Thanks for being here. So about to hear what happened the rest of the day, and he was crossed. So we're going to see and what Dr. John Martin, so many doctors in this case, Dr. John Martin has to say on cross. And I think that Rosie probably did the cross on him. And you have to have the patience of a saint. But I wish I could have been in there for that, because Rosie, sometimes he just doesn't pull punches a lot of times. And it's interesting. It's good to see that. As a fan of lawyers, which now my friends are calling me, is like, I didn't know like 20 years ago that you'd be like this big lawyer fan. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I am. That's really interesting. Anyway, have a good night. Thank you guys for joining me. I'm going to get in tomorrow. So positive vibes out there. Hi, Austin. Missed pillow time with us. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. Have a good night. Thanks for being here.